Arthur Elgort, who is a very well-known photographer, much awarded photographer, held in very high esteem by many of us in the fashion business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're interviewing Arthur Elgort in this series of this is called the Master Series. You're a master, aren't you, Arthur? Arthur Elgort is a very, very, very well-esteemed photographer in this country and in Europe, and has probably a number of prizes that you've won for your work. Anyway, we're going to interview him about his work over these years that I've known him. Arthur, you know what I don't know in order to start?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know where you came from to New York. And I don't know if when you came to be a photographer or you were already a photographer.
Okay, I was born in New York.
You were born in New York?
In Washington Heights.
That's wonderful.
And
I didn't know that.
I went to PS 187, which is on 187th Street, and I lived on Fort Washington Avenue and 190th Street. And
I always thought he came from
No, I always
town.
thought so too. But then I realized recently that I actually came from here. That's why I'm still a master of the subways. Although I got off of Grand Street today instead of Broadway Lafayette, because I was busy reading the paper, you know.
Oh, God.
But
so then you became a photographer.
Why?
When? Well, why is a good that's a good question.
Then I wound up at Stuyvesant High School after public school, where my parents, in those days you listened to your parents, you didn't know any better. And my parents sent me to Stuyvesant, and I made it through. And then I went locally to college, to Hunter College on 68th Street and Park Avenue. And this was during the 60s. And I photographs, and I was an art major, and I was was experimenting with Polaroids of my work to see what they looked like before I made them worse.
Right.
And then I started photographing every girl in the cafeteria, on the fencing team, on the dance group, and things like that. And I became almost like the hunter photographer. There were only about 3 cameras in. Maybe there were 2,000 kids, and there were something like 3 cameras in the school, and I was one of them.
And you were one of them.
Right.
But wait.
Doing a voice check.
Okay, just a feedback. And then I soon realized as a dance photographer that I made about 50 cents a week, I think, and lost money like crazy. And then I kept sitting around talking to my big brother, who was more practical. He was working in an ad agency, and he said, "Arthur, what is the closest thing to dance that you can think of where you can make money?" And I said, "Look, these fashion magazines look like they need help. You know, nobody goes outdoors. Everybody's against the wall or whatever it is." So I started practicing fashion on
out
dancers.
of doors?
Out of doors mainly.
Out of doors mainly.
Yeah, on the corner, kind of.
I mean, and that's how you got into fashion.
Yeah.
That's a marvel. I had no idea.
And then I started to,
But in the sense of timing, you came to Vogue around very early 70s.
Right.
So you were not practicing very long. I mean, if you were in the 60s...
No, I started, I hung up my shingle in Christmas of I think it was 69. 69. And I had practiced in the summer and made I guess you'd say a book, a portfolio, and on Martha's Vineyard and in New York City a bit. And put that stuff together and had a couple of like model type friends who were brave, and they would drop it off at different places like magazines, and actually I think my first big job, or my first job, was for McCall's magazine, which I felt, I don't know why they're asking me. My friends must have dropped me off there.
Right.
And it was a fellow named Bob Cato, who was wild kind of. And then in those days, I figured all art directors wore large scarves around their neck. And And he kind of started me out. And he said he had pride in discovering people.
Yeah.
And so I was one of his victims. And my first job was to, strangely enough, photograph Clive Barnes, who wasn't exactly a pretty fashion model. It was
Wow.
close to dance, and that
It
was
was
my
close.
first job.
Wait
for
a
them.
minute. We ought to explain to people that Bob Cato was a rather well-known art director.
Right.
And Clive Barnes was a very famous dance critic.
Right.
For the New York Times.
Right.
So, I mean, it wasn't just...
And so it was for their eastern local part of the magazine. Like it was not an insert, but they would have one section that wouldn't show in California, let's say, or something like that. So that was my first job. And then right after that job, they called me up and they sent me to, of all weird places, St. Petersburg, Florida, which was a little scary, with a beautiful girl named Margaret Broderick, a young model. And I did somehow or other, that was my second job, and I did the cover and about 12 pages. So of course my head was, well, that's the way you start. They test you out on a little thing like a guy or something like that, and then they give you the girl if you get the guy good, or something like that. And then simultaneously to that, my book had gone to. My friends didn't think I was ready for Vogue yet. It was one of those things. Yeah. And my book had gone to Glamour and Mademoiselle. And I had 2 appointments like within a week's time. And my first appointment was at Glamour, and I met Mickey Denhoff, and all these things were beginning to happen. And sweet Mickey, with her Viennese accent, I still remember going in there to the Gray Bar building, and Mickey said to me, she said, well, young man, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I'd like to do, like the cover, 12 pages, nothing more, nothing less. And she said, oh, you're so charming and funny.
You're so
she
cute.
said, I can offer you what we like to call, what George and I like to call the turns.
The turns.
And I said, what does that mean, the turns?
Let me explain.
Okay. Let Grace
explain to
tell
our
you all
group.
about the turns.
The turns were pictures, subjects that were handled in the front of the book. They were not. They were.
Or the back of the book.
Or the back of the book. It took up about a half page. How do you call it?
They
up
were
and
like
down.
almost
Up
like
and down.
columns, thin.
Columns. That's right.
Like full length.
Right. Right.
And I kind of said, Mickey, I don't know. I just have this feeling that I'm meant for much more than the turns. And if I just do turns for you, I may do the turns so well that at least you'll have a guy to do the turns. You won't have to worry about moving me. And she said, everybody wants to do the big things. You have to first pay for it. I said, well, down the street at McCall's, I'm like, doing all right. And so she said, I want to wish you good luck.
We ought to explain also to everyone that when you went to Glamour, you were at that point in the same building that housed Mademoiselle and Vogue, and
it was Condé Nast.
And it was Condé Nast. And eventually, is that where Alex found you?
Right. No. Then what happened? So Mickey nicely sent me on my way, and then the next week I had an appointment with Nani Moore and Roger Schoening, and they were at Mademoiselle magazine. Now they oohed and awed and they called Leo Lerman into the office. So I knew that was good because he looked like a professor, So I knew I was like possibly getting somewhere. And they all came in and they looked at my pictures and they talked and talked and talked. And before I knew it, they said to me, we have a job and it's about New York City and it's called Hangouts. And we want you and Leo and Nani to pick some places and have this girl there, this one there, this one there, and we'd like to give you 12 pages, that's all. And I said, well, that sounds like a good opportunity, and I did that job.
Let me interrupt, did you?
Yes.
Let me interrupt that to just sort of, to put everybody back into the timing of this. The timing of this is late 60s, beginning 70s?
Right, 69.
69, Mademoiselle had over the years one of the finest really groups of editors and art direction. I mean, it was prized when Leo Lerman came to see something. It was a prize. when Nani Moore came to see something. It was a prize.
They were
It was a kind of group that I would savor now. I mean, there's kind of no telling anyone about that time. But anyway,
And had
they
wonderful
got you,
writers
had
and
wonderful
things like
writers,
that.
had wonderful thoughts and subjects. Yeah, go ahead.
So that was my first job. And again, things went quite naturally. I found the model for them. Now that's, their model editor, her name was Kim Avedon at the time.
Yeah, sure.
She was the Sarah Slavin of, let's call it, Mademoiselle. And they kind of said, well, is there anybody you like to photograph that you know? And I said, well, there's this kid that just came from Queens, and I photographed her last week. There's some pictures of her, and she's real pretty, and she hasn't done it yet. She's in high school, and they said, well, send her over. Her name was Bonnie Leischer. And she later became Bonnie Pressman many, many years later.
Did she?
And she was a very kind of boyish-looking girl who had a wonderful, fresh look. And I think some famous person, after I saw her, gave her a haircut. And in fact, the haircut worked, and it was almost Prince Valiant-like, or whatever you call it, kind of looser than that. So she was the main model for the job, and simultaneously after her, she went on another go-see to a friend of mine named Bruce Lawrence, and the same week, he photographed her for 17 and did a cover on her, and I photographed her for Mademoiselle and did a cover by mistake. I came in and took
And found it was a cover.
Beauty with Room at the top.
Yes.
So we both got covers and pages on her at the same time, and that launched her career.
Well, I'm going to take you a little bit further to ask you. First, let me ask you, where do we see your work now? Say where we see your editorial work and your
last month in
advertising.
American Vogue. You see commercials for CoverGirl on television.
Say where, because that was going to be my other part of my question.
Those are some, and I'm still voguing it up all over the world.
Are you all over the world?
I even do Russian Vogue and Japanese Vogue, and I'm sure when you were at American Vogue, those were probably imaginary ideas of Cy Newhouse or something like that when he took over the publishing world or whatever it was. And I'm still, I even did Greek Vogue recently. A lot of them seem to be run out of England. And actually my first Vogue was British Vogue.
Right. Was it?
Yeah. And that was my first Vogue job. And it was right after those other jobs. So I was kind of like, not overnight, but pretty, I had good opportunities, and hopefully I lived up to them because they did call back.
But what listeners to this, watchers to this, ought to get to. I'm going to add a word to all that you're saying, which is about your photographs. I remember that the words we used to bounce around when we all thought about you at Vogue or at Mirabella, where I tried to get you but couldn't, was the word ease. There was always such an ease to your photography. Women in motion, not haphazardly or just with a certain ease. That is just, I'm not sure I've ever seen it done as well as you do,
thank you.
Arthur. No, it's true. And one of the questions I was going to ask you had to do with that in a way, which is where do you like to work mostly? Outdoors still, or in the studio?
I would say more
on location, or what?
on location.
More on location.
But I have a nice studio, so
yeah, it's a beauty.
And I like that too. And in fact, when I did first start, I was mainly on location, and it really wasn't until a little bit of British Vogue, and then especially American Vogue, that alternately it was location and studio. And there were a couple of famous rental studios at that time. One famous one was called Taka, that Vogue used to rent all the time, where you felt pretty impressed because Irving Penn was in the next room. So, and that was like not a child, a hero for me. So obviously, then I worked for British Vogue a bit, and then what happened was a phone call came, and it was Mr. Lieberman, And he was one of, you had to go up to some room with an,
He was
with an
Alex,
empty desk.
let me
and-
just say, that Alex Lieberman was the editorial director of Vogue, and really
And Condé Nast.
and Condé Nast, true in essence. And it was Alex. I remember Alex who introduced us. I mean, he
Right.
introduced me to you.
And he called me in, and then he said to me, Arthur, my boy, we've been keeping an eye on you. I've seen a few things you've done for Leo. I've seen some British Vogue. He was knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And we're going to give you a small thing to do with Polly Mellon. And I still remember that first job. It was with a young, scrawny girl named Annie Holbrook, who was a friend of mine.
Annie Holbrook.
Annie Holbrook, and it was at the Carlisle Hotel, and she had her own little dog with her.
Yeah.
And I still remember Polly getting ready for the shot, and there was quite a bit of drama. I felt like it was part of a Broadway show. And Annie sat down in the entrance of the Carlisle with her dog, and I noticed that Annie's collar was like this. Like this. So I was looking at her, and I went over, and I went like this, and I straightened her collar, and Polly said, "Oh my gosh, what do we have here?" She said, "Don't you realize, dearie, this is the style." And she said, "What are they going to make me do next?" Anyway, welcome to Vogue. It was one of those. It was very funny, and made me feel relaxed.
One of the things, I have two things, because you've sort of brought them up, was when it comes to thinking about models, in the past, who were named, can you name some names of models in the past that you thought were wonderful? I don't know if
Well,
you'll
my
name
Vogue,
ones
my
today.
Vogue opportunities, especially,
Yeah.
let's say, and I first started working before American Vogue, I did Bonnie Leisure quite a bit for Mademoiselle. And then I would say the other one that I did for British Vogue, her name was Apollonia von Rabenstein. And these were girls that I knew and tested, so, we pushed each other in a sense. And then when I first started with American Vogue, what was interesting was they had a more, let's call it was a little stricter how the girls came about. They had to please Grace Mirabella, and they had to please Alex Lieberman and Polly Mellon, and so the level of girl was very exciting. Some of them might have been more difficult mentally than they were physically, but the list. My first girl, again, another girl who I tested before Vogue started using her, Lisa Taylor was my first Vogue, let's call it Vogue girl, and Patty Hansen was the other one, and Roseanne Vella was the other one. And to be honest, when I look back, and I, to some degree look back, and I realized those girls, in their own way, lived up to a certain thing, and were easily as big as what I guess you'd start to call the supergirls of the 80s, or the non-supergirls of the late 90s and this moment. So when you think about it, they were very well chosen by, let's call it the Sarah to Polly to Grace to to the magazine, and they were all kind of didn't really do much else except that, in a sense. They
that's
weren't.
true. They were.
The agents
They were
were
constant.
representing
They were
them on a pretty simple level. It wasn't like, we're trying to get her the deal from so and so. They were working for American Vogue for $12 an hour, or whatever. Now I think they're up to $20 an hour, or stuff like that. So you knew they wanted to be there. But when you think about it, they really did make great photo opportunities. And of course, people like Polly Mellon were, they built these kids up. I still remember.
Polly Mellon,
Yeah.
let me just interrupt to establish that Polly Mellon was is a very, very well-known fashion editor of Vogue, was a fashion, very
Right.
fine, very fine.
And she kind of treated these gals as her kind of surrogate daughter types and taught them how to walk. I was there on the street when she would give Roseanne, "Darling, hold this pocketbook and walk like this." Because a lot of these girls wore sneakers up until a few days before these Vogue jobs, and you know, and I even remember at one little sitting before we went to Washington D.C. with Patty Hansen, Polly loaning Patty a pair of heels to take home to Staten Island to practice on. In the meantime, when we did go to Washington D.C., luckily we didn't use the heels, and we used the famous flat shoe that Soran copied. Oh, Soran, sorry about it. What's it called? The little shop on Park Avenue that everybody wore. What? Yes, Madame Arpels.
Oh, Madame Arpels.
The Arpel
Right.
loafer
Yeah, the Arpel
was
loafer.
the shoe of choice at that moment.
It wasn't $500
It was the
at
flat
that point,
of
no.
choice. It really
Right.
was. And luckily, Patty mainly wore that in this job at the when we went to the Rotunda, the Jefferson Memorial, et cetera, et cetera. That was that wild trip when Polly
Let me
had,
get you,
yeah.
I'm going to get you to something else. I'm going
Okay.
to get you to, you talked about models. Would you ever go, would you want to think back to, are there any models that maybe haven't even lived in your lifetime that you would love to have photographed?
Yeah, Lisa Fonseca.
Lisa Fonseca.
Right.
Right.
Because I had met her, I was very impressed, she was brilliant. You know, I like models who have, at one time or other in their life, danced. Because I find them more fluid, more able to, let's say, repeat themselves. Although I've been given people like Patty, who believe me, didn't dance that kind of dance, you know, or whatever it was, and enjoyed them.
What about
immensely.
now, Arthur? What about models now? I mean, if you don't want to answer by name,
Yeah.
you don't have to. But I mean, since the 70s, how have things changed in the sense of faces, multiplicity of models, whatever? What do you think?
I think on the editorial level,
Yeah.
because they've always been paid, let's call it cab fare and lunch money or something like that. Maybe they're up to $180 a day now. You know, one, they really want to be there, so that's wonderful. I think where it's more difficult in modern times is that on occasion, Marianne will say to me, well, you have a small job for this person or so-and-so, and they really have no money, and they can only pay the model $5,000 a day. And you just can't find anybody these days for $5,000. And I would kind of go, I'll do it. Or I have some friends, or, you know. I would say on the editorial level, tomorrow, you know. So you have to give them some kind of, you know,
Okay.
credit. So
Yeah.
I don't remember where we, you want to guide us? with
I
that?
was going to.
The models of the 90s.
That's why we were talking about probably easier for you to go back, and you came to Lisa Fonseca's, the wife of Irving Penn, deceased wife of Irving Penn, a beauty. But I mean, isn't there a different way that you would define models, the looks of models today? I mean, aren't there many more different
But
looks
I think
or not?
anything always went, it's just that you had to find the place where you could do it. Because I remember at the start of my career, I was simultaneously, while I was working, trying to work my hometown, New York, I was also working Paris and London. And, you know, lots of times my policy has always been, aside from the fact, yes, it's sure nice if I can take a good picture of this person, but my policy has been to some degree that if there's an editor and they say, my name is Grace Coddington, and I love this young French girl named Aurore Clement or Apollonia van Ravenstein, I was happy to kind of say, this woman has gone to 75 shows and lived through all of those hellos in the first row and watched them walk by and everything. If she has an opinion and she likes to dress this person, there's a good chance she might be, you know, she might be right. And the fact that she's behind that person, my job is to find what's good about that person, get a good picture of them. Because, you know, that girl, let's say, has been chosen. You know, I remember, you know, being called up and told, you don't know this girl, Lisa Rial, but Sarah saw her last week, and she's blonde, and she's perfect, and that's who you're doing. You know, whatever, and you'd say, hello, Lisa, nice to meet you, and you'd get to work. And to this day, it's still a little bit like that.
Like that.
At least on the, let's say on the international, let's call it Condé Nast kind of level, where this is the pool, someone new walks in the door, you look at them. When anybody comes here to see me, in general, I take a few exposures or snaps of them and just see, well, if they can come out good in this casual situation, maybe they're gonna, then you get the film back the next day, or the proofs back or whatever, and you look and you kind of say, yeah, it kind of works out.
Tell me something else, though. Talk about personalities that you have photographed that you might. I mean, there must be moments in time, or are there moments in time? A picture just will not forget. A person who's been here that you photographed, and the result of it was just for you stellar.
Yeah, lots of times it isn't always fashion. It's
No,
other
right.
opportunities.
Right.
A good example, even though we, and I did pull some, so we have examples. A good example, Grace and Alex had an idea years ago, and they called me into the office and said, Arthur, we can't think of anyone else who could do Nancy Kissinger except you, in our group. And in fact, I remember Alex making a joke and saying, imagine Scavullo running around China, or something like that.
Let me interrupt.
Yeah.
The key point of this is that what we were going to do was have a sitting just as China had opened up.
Exactly.
And would allow anyone in, but it had to be a small group. It couldn't be a cast of thousands the way photographic sittings are usually done. I want to explain this because it has to do with you. It had to be 4 people: the photographer, the person, the model, the editor, and one other, and one other person who
Whatever
could do
Nancy
everything.
wanted, basically.
At which point, the only one that I remember that Alex Lieberman thought could do it, and who did it so gloriously, was Arthur Elgort. I
Yeah, that was
remember that. I
exciting.
mean, there was no choice on that. I mean, you were it because I mean, Arthur's not going to tell you this. I have to tell you, because Arthur would take someone through whatever the difficulties might be, and in the crowds, because there are always crowds in China, walking down the streets, and quickly catch Nancy, catch Nancy, catch Nancy.
Right.
I mean, it was not a matter, we just stand there for 5 hours and maybe I'll take a picture. It was not anything like that.
Nancy got herself together. She did her own makeup. As she said, I'd go out every night. I actually know how to get myself out the door, and it's my job. So she didn't, because when they did say to her, would you like a makeup person? She said, I know how to do it. She said, I wouldn't mind someone to give me a little shampoo and a set once in a while, or whatever it was that she enjoyed. And she always had this kind of nice, kind of fluffy, short haircut. And we all had to go over and be interviewed by Nancy. I remember going over for tea, and Mr. Lieberman's last words to me were, Arthur, my boy, I know you don't wear a jacket. I know you don't wear a tie, but you're going to China, and you will be wearing a jacket and a tie. Do we understand each other? And then I still also remember him saying, oh, that's great. I said, Alex, is Polly coming? And he said, Arthur, after all these years, we finally made peace with China. We do not need another war on our hands. He said, we're sending young Ann Campman, who's a very diplomatic, nice gal, who takes care of our market work, who, by the way, was and is a very
Wonderful,
lovely
yeah.
gal.
Wonderful.
And she was part of our,
But
she ran our
But also,
group.
no, to give everybody their due, the key to the sitting was speed. The key was Nancy dresses instantly, walks with the group, changes the clothes. I mean, there was no sort of incredible preparation the way many photographic sittings
It was just part of her
might
day.
be. And she did it as if it were part of her day.
A group of
Right.
designers, including Jeffrey Bean and Oscar de la Renta and Bill Blass and Calvin Klein, et cetera, let's call it the American designers, each chose or presented something to Vogue and Nancy that Nancy had fit on her, and that was her real wardrobe. There was no other wardrobe on the trip.
Right.
Her suitcase was that Vogue-y stuff. It would be like, here's a present from Bill, and here's one from whoever, and that's what she wore, and she was very, between her and Anne, they knew, this morning we're going in Shanghai over to the river, and Nancy's wearing the slacks with the little suede jacket, or something like that,
right,
you know,
right.
and then after lunch, it might be like, well, you know, you got a bit of Nancy going from here to there with some people, and then we went to that place, and everything at that time in China, you only did for 7 minutes anyway,
Right.
or 20 minutes at the most. It was very organized. Everything was by the Chinese.
Yeah.
And Nancy was the nicest company and a wonderful guide for us, and insisted always upon eating with us and, you know, giving us info. There were many times even where we would ask her a question sitting in a hotel in Beijing, and Nancy would kind of go, and she would go, and then she would look at us and say, they are the most marvelous, marvelous people. And then we're walking down the hall or something, and she would say, that room was bugged, dear. You know, because in those days they were curious. This was a kind of a group of funny foreigners.
Listen,
you know.
that trip, I mean, is an amazing trip. The final remarkable. But I'm going to move you from that to a discussion of art directors. I'm not sure you're going to name names, but in the past, I have a sense that the world of art direction has shifted a bit. Can you explain that? I mean, at one time, early on in the 70s, I would know, or the 80s, in art direction, you plotted out what was expected for you to bring back as an editorial. I don't know if that's true of advertising, I have no idea. But
Well,
I'm
more
told
true, I would
it was more true.
Yeah, they really know because they're paying more.
They're paying more.
So they want to
But I'm
think
to-
they're covering their risks.
I'm
more.
told that now, I get the impression that now there's more freewheeling as far as sittings are concerned. There's not an art direction that starts from the beginning and then ends at the end. What do you think?
I felt in my case that I was never art directed. I was directed in terms of this is full length and we wouldn't mind a little action, or we wouldn't mind her to be happy instead of sad, or things like that. And this is the look, I would call it. When I think of Vogue magazine, it is based to a certain degree on presentation, and until the presentation of that person, you know, let's say the finish or whatever, is done, you don't have a Vogue picture yet. At least that's how I think of it. And so it wasn't so much art direction as I would call it more fashion direction. And in fact, I always felt that the art direction, to some degree at Condé Nast, has always been more or less a side feature of what the fashion department and wants, and that the art direction falls into a certain pattern that fits into those pages. Maybe, I always remember, there were certain people, and I knew during their heyday, or I knew if I photographed an outfit by Jeffrey Bean, we'll use as an example, in Washington, D.C., that the editor would look at me and say, darling, if you want to go double, there's no problem in a double page with Jeffrey. You might get it. And then there were other ones, let's say when they threw in a Yohji Yamamoto by chance or something like that, I knew lots of times not to waste too much energy in a double page in comparison.
I have to say
I felt that
I have to say that I'm not going to agree with
Yeah.
that, and that very often I was aware of the fact that a remarkable photograph, and I still remember a remarkable photograph, a triple, you did of Emmanuel Ungaro's ready-to-wear collection years ago in a January issue. I remember forget those three girls. I mean, a remarkable picture is a remarkable picture, and you give it the works. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
but
what you
again,
do.
there we're talking about, again, personal favorites of the
I know.
administration.
I disagree.
To
I
some
have to
degree.
disagree
When
with
I
that.
did American Vogue, let's say in the 70s,
Yeah.
if there was a Saint Laurent or an Ungaro,
Oh, yeah.
my pictures had a pretty good chance of getting in there because
Well,
the
wait a minute.
editors themselves were wearing
But
Saint Laurent
Arthur,
and
hold
Ungaro.
it. Yeah, but hold
Right.
it. Well, and I mean, I'm going to.
Remember, you can always erase all
this a
this.
little.
Oh,
That's right.
great.
We can shoot you too. But
Right.
I would take this a little back, a little bit further, which is you're now discussing the best of the best. Saint Laurent at
Right.
that moment, of course, and Emmanuel Ungaro at that moment.
Right.
So, I mean, you don't go looking around for big spreads for minor players who can't.
Right. No,
can't
but
give you,
no, but what I'm
what-
saying is, if you do go looking around for minor players, you may not get your way because even though it's a very good, like you just said, a very good photograph,
Yeah.
you knew put in. After a while, you know, your editor, who was your corner person, so to speak, your catalyst,
Yeah.
the person who led you a little bit and said, "This is Emmanuel Ungaro, and he can be a double page author. You know, he can be because we wear him ourselves, or we, you know, we believe in him. It's like today.
Arthur
it's like
Elgort's view.
No, but it is
of-
true. If you go to the fashion shows and check out and go down the aisle and say to the, let's say, the editors, it was written in the papers again once more today. It said in Milan, believe it or not, a lot of the editors are still wearing Prada. Now, you may say,
But
and they're
listen,
wearing the latest Prada
I mean,
bag.
disagree. Wait, I just
Okay.
to tell you something, which is that the editors at showings are not going to be wearing the worst from the worst collection.
No,
They're
but-
going to be wearing from the best collection.
No, we understand that, but
yeah,
what I'm
but so
saying
you've
is...
got to start with it's the best. You don't
Okay,
make
but
spreads
you don't
out
think-
of something that's minor. You
Right,
just can't.
yeah.
Usually they don't even show themselves. to
Yeah,
be
but even
terrific.
to this day, and you may deny this, and you can take all this off,
Yeah.
there were times when I would kind of like be ready, you know, they'd come out of the bus, and the girl would be wearing something, and even Lisa Taylor or Patty Henson didn't look all that great, you know, when they looked in the mirror, they didn't even think they looked great for all I know, and they came out and they looked a little like, well, I guess, and Polly would come over, and I would say to Polly, gee, Polly, I said, you really like that? And Polly would look at me, and then she'd come over to me and she'd go, friends in the house. Now, what did friends in the house mean
I
to
don't
you?
know, but
You
I
have
know. I know what
you
you're. No,
must
wait.
know,
I'm not,
Grace.
I do know, but I disagree. I
Yeah, but
disagree. I
you don't
disagree.
agree.
I
You
do
don't
not.
remember having someone
I do remember. I
from
do.
another floor in the building coming to you and saying, this poor company
No.
is taking out 20 pages of
They never-
advertising,
but
and if you
Yes,
can see
yes,
it in
you
your
made an
heart,
effort. Yes, you
you
made
make
an
an
effort.
right.
But they were never the big time players. Never.
No, but there were smaller ones that got
Okay,
in there.
Okay, I
Okay.
knew Arthur Elgort.
No, but you have
I
to,
knew-
you know,
Yeah.
you don't remember even like when you were in the business that on occasion something would come in and they would say, I'll give you a good example.
Let me tell you, I'm going to.
All right, and I'm not saying Tommy Hilfiger is not as good as Mucha Prada.
that's a very
He
good-
may
that's
be
a very good
easily
example. That's a
as
good
talented as
example.
Mucha.
Yeah.
But maybe he buys a page or two once in a while, so you make an effort to try to include him, let's say. And maybe that didn't happen in your day, but I've
I'm
noticed
glad
it.
I'm not around.
No, but you understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
sure.
And it doesn't mean that the guy's not, who's to say, he may go down in history,
Arthur,
you know?
let me move you from that to a question I've asked. In your years of photography, and being a location fellow, I mean, because you're on the street, I mean, it can be anywhere. Where have been your most favorite assignments? Where have they taken
Well,
you?
my 2 trips to China, which were at least 10 years apart.
Apart?
You know, I think the second time I went was in the late 80s with Grace Coddington and Linda Evangelista, and visited only
For whom?
Shanghai
For
for
whom?
American Vogue.
For American
And I liked the both of them. They, the
Wow.
return to the same spot was very exciting for me. I've always liked, let's call it cowboys and cowboys. So going out west on a few occasions for me has been exciting, you know. Going to Egypt was exciting at the time, or going to Paris for the collections. Hey, that's a pretty good setup, isn't it? You know, and you know, because it does offer a lot of variety. So there were memorable, you know, let's call it trip opportunities. You know, that yes, you remember the trip and you remember the people you met and all the other photo opportunities while you were just, let's say, being there and or being treated in a different way. You know, I wasn't there on a tourist tour. You know, so the opportunities were amazing on that level. You know, to go someplace and.
I'm going to shift you to a subject of the internet. Does any of your work, do you work on the internet? Do you have dealings
Do I have
with, do you have
what's that called, a site?
A site?
Yes.
Or do you?
Have I ever seen it? No. My agent has seen
is that
it.
so?
My studio manager has seen it
What's
for
on,
years.
what is on it?
Oh, I think everything from books that I have done to certain pictures that are Patty Hansen that are showing still that they're selling through Staley Wise.
Why is it there, Arthur? To show people wherever they are
because in
about your
modern
work?
times, the generation that's growing up, my children are a good example,
right.
they're all on the net. I have to beg my 5-year-old to turn off the computer because I wouldn't know how to do it. I'd unplug it, you know. You know, but they're all aware of looking things up in that nature.
How do your photographs look on the internet?
I don't know. I've never seen
you
it.
don't know.
I'm afraid to look.
What does an agent say? Oh, you're afraid to look. I'm curious because I don't know.
No, but you can
what
see what you've done and things
But-
like that, and
but
I'm
when
sure
you-
it's like a bit of a history.
I know that, but what I'm saying is, what are the results of it? I mean, in other words, if I were still at Vogue or at Mirabella, you'd be in saying, listen, I mean, how could you have cropped that picture? Or how could you have done that picture so it looks almost like a double image? Whatever. I mean, how does your work look on the internet? Has anyone told you? I mean, does a fashion picture of yours look, is the production good? Is it
I don't know.
soft?
No,
You don't
I
know.
have no idea.
Right.
I don't enjoy looking at screens in the first place. I just never liked it. I like how do you call it, a three-dimensional, even though it's flat, piece of paper, right? And you know, things. Like if someone said, well, you can read this book on your laptop, it's just not for me.
Well,
Now,
you used to do J. Crew. I don't know if
Right.
you still do or not.
not lately, but I did do some.
But didn't that go on the internet?
Possibly. I know it went in the catalog.
Right,
For
went in the
sure.
catalog, for sure.
And I think a lot of things, I don't even know if magazines are on the internet
Yes, they are,
in such a way.
Yeah.
It's just, I know sometimes my kids say to me, don't you want to play total annihilation on the computer? It's just not interesting to me, but I'm sure it exists. I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
But you can look me up on it. I'm sure I know I have what they call a site. But maybe everybody's got a site. Do you all have sites? You know what I'm saying? Well, you can, right? If you want. You know, and leave little messages, I guess, or whatever, you know.
Listen, you know what I meant to ask you, and I think maybe I did, but we got away from it. I was going to ask you how you define your photographs, your photography, your style.
I think my
How do you
style
define it?
is that of a cultured, highly cultured amateur who is a photo enthusiast. I'm camera crazy, I'm photography crazy, I've been that way since I started doing it. And to me, the most important pictures are the ones I took yesterday. You know, that's how I look at it. And I think people try their best to adjust to that and see whether or not I can be of help to them.
But
you know?
looking at your work, looking at any of your
Yeah.
work, there's a consistency to the work. I mean, you don't reinvent yourself every day you go out with your camera. You don't say, oh, I think what I'll
try
do
this,
is take
but I do
yeah.
try things all the time. On my way to work this morning,
Yeah.
As I walked from Grand Street and the Bowery to here, I did take 2 exposures on a Rolleiflex, you know. So I'm always working
But that's going to be
you know,
what the subject was. But the manner, what your eye saw, doesn't that kind of frame it into the same? I mean, I remember you used to talk about a woman catching a woman walking, and you always, I forget how you said it, something like you always caught her on the up move.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, no,
I mean,
what
there's
you're
a
looking for, it's timing.
little bit of a timing,
Yeah,
right?
it's enthusiasm
But
for,
don't
know,
you bring that same kind of timing to everything then?
I try, yeah.
Yeah.
I do it with my kids now. You know,
Yeah.
I practice. But I consider myself like a musician. I think of musicians and I think of dancers. All of them, including the best ones, practice. They really practice. They do their scales. They warm up. A dancer goes in the mornings and probably does her repetitions, her bar, let's call it. And then she's ready to perform. So I do the same thing. The reason I got into almost, let's call it, the getting ready of things was that the one thing I knew for sure was that even though this was so-and-so's outfit, we're entirely out of season, it's summertime, and she's wearing a tweed suit. You understand?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. All of that unreality going on. The one reality that I've always known is that a group of people get together on a certain day, and the fact that they're doing this, to me, starts me off as the reality of it. So my good picture of the day may be the picture when Roseanne is lying on the table and everybody's over her going like this. And that may be the one that in my case that I look at and keep, and that's my memory of the reality of the day. The picture maybe that is taken, let's call it the final result after everybody gets out of the way or something like that, it may not even have, for me, the same impact. That is the commission, and I appreciate it. And my goal is to make it have as much life as the fact that we all got together and made this thing. But sometimes I lose on those. But that same day, it could be the waiter who walked in the door, that because I'm doing so-and-so's face, all of a sudden the real person who walks in the door even looks more like they've got a halo over them. Even the real thing appears. And it's because of the opportunity that I'm there that the real thing does appear, you know? It's a funny way of thinking about it.
No, it isn't.
But it's a way of, in my case, you know, sustaining myself so it doesn't get boring, you know? Because you know yourself, I'm sure that if we look now at even some of the Connie Nast magazines or some of the Hearst magazines, whatever it is, if we look back and say, okay, 30 years ago, which is only 1970, who was there 30 years ago with loads of enthusiasm, who's still there? Maybe Irving Penn? Maybe in Irving Penn, if you look on the list or something like that. And it's the people who've managed, I think, to, in their own head, be enthusiastic, who can kind of, what do you call it, get reborn again every year in some way or another. You know, maybe it's because of the subject matter that's put in front of them, a new person, you know. Maybe it's like you send Irving Penn some kid that Renee saw, right? I still remember the day when Renee called the studio and said, I want to speak to Arthur. There's this little girl who just walked in the office. Her name is Christy Turlington. Miss Mirabella thinks there's something there. She hasn't done a thing. There's something. Take a look at it. because you may have her next week. And I remember this little pixie girl came walking in, and she didn't even have any photos, right? And the next week, she was in my sitting with Andrea Robinson. And there's that same kind of thing, that, what do you call it? Like, it's like, I'm sure in show business it's the same thing. Like they're doing an audition, and here comes the regular, there she is, what's her name?
There's a
Isn't she
magic,
nice?
there's a magic.
And then all of a sudden someone comes in and everybody's going like, don't look now.
Yeah.
Just who just walked in the door. Our next girl is going to be doing like 10 pages a month, Isn't there that excitement? You can remember,
Sure.
Christy Turlington is
Yes,
a
that's a
wonderful
very good
example, right?
Perfect example.
Because again, there's Christy Turlington did not do the turns. She went from doing nothing to doing everything. Isn't that
That's
true?
right, that's right. Yeah,
But
very
somebody had to be brave enough to give her a blessing, because like you said, if people aren't really good, they might say, well, she has no work. She hasn't done anything. She couldn't be good. Why? We want an experienced model. Someone's been working for years. What's always been nice about, let's say, the magazines and the good editors and the good, is that they're willing to kind of go, see the kid who just came in the door? Let's take a chance and do it. I'm not saying there's sometimes not a reshoot.
Sure.
Or, well, she sure looked good that day, maybe we were praying and hoping.
Arthur, what I wanted to ask you is about magazines today. If you don't want to touch this,
Right.
I quite understand it. How you feel about take a look at the new Harper's Bazaar. How do I put this? I'm not going to say do you like them.
I glance at
You glance at
Yes, I
them.
glance at things. My favorite magazines personally have nothing to do with fashion. I like Ballet Review, you know what I mean? And the Gramophone and stuff. Those are the ones I pay for and subscribe to, so I must like
That's good.
them.
That's
I always
important.
say to people, what are you willing to put your money down for,
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the other things, it's my profession, so I'm curious. So when I'm standing online at D'Agostino, I will sometimes flip through. This month, I think Julia Roberts is on a cover, right? And it's Bazaar. And Bazaar is striving, once again, for an identity to reflect the people who are working there and modern times and things like that. And I kind of, glance through it and kind of say, well, that's pretty clean, the type is nice on that one. Gosh, they didn't mess up that one on the left. Oh dear, looks like they've kind of cut it on the paper stock just a drop. I'll kind of go like this and say, looks like they're down to X amount of pounds on the paper, or, I can see through that stuff. Or the screen is thicker on certain magazines. Now, that is a very kind of corny photographer's way of looking at things.
It's not corny, it's technical.
Who really cares? It's just a magazine. It's supposed to get out there, people are supposed to read it, and people are supposed to throw it out and
You
get
don't
another.
think any more about them as in, gee, I love that. I like the content of it. I like that magazine. I think they've done a hell of a job.
I wish I could work for that one, or have an article in there
Yeah,
myself.
right.
Yeah, on occasion, I've seen ones where I've kind of said, gosh, they're doing a real good job. I hope they call me, or something like that. And then there are other ones where I can say, they look like they're going through a period of paste and cut and slice and so and so. Doesn't mean that that's not good for their readership.
Yeah.
It just may not, I have to just get it in my head that it may not be good for me, but it doesn't mean that I'm not greedy enough to take the job on occasion.
All right, then finally, I'm going to ask you this. We've talked, Marvel, you've talked wonderfully about a lot of things. Is there something I missed that I should have asked you? Can you think of?
No, but I was
Should
just
I have-
thinking of a couple of things.
What?
Probably, in my case, the fact that I practice on my children a lot has kept my enthusiasm for photography. It could be, let's face it, if you're in any field for a number of years, even a fashion designer who's been around for 30 years probably has to say to himself, hey, I got to be honest with myself, I may not be the new kid on the block or whatever it is. I'm establishment, but is the world waiting to see what I do new? I think in my case, I have to give a certain amount of credit to the fact that I have a family, and I'm using them as my quiet victims, you know? They don't, you know, yeah, I took pictures of my son in the snow yesterday in Vermont, and I said, Warren, just go over there just for a second. Dad needs to just look through something, and Warren, you know, he'll go over there and do something, and he'll say, yeah, thanks a lot, Dad. You know, stuff like that. That's got something to do with it.
That's got something to do with that. I understand what you're saying, but that also, in a way, defines the picture. I mean, your style, it defines your style.
It's kind of like I'm a photo.
Yeah.
Was I in B&H Camera a few weeks ago and looking at a replacement like a tripod, and I even wanted to look at the Nikon 100 to see if I was modern enough to be able to deal with it, because it's got lights inside instead of dials like I still use. It's an old piece of junk, right? By the way, it holds up better than all the new Leicas in many ways. So I'm still like a photo fanatic enthusiast, and I think that's my good luck. Because I do have friends who are wonderful photographers, but believe me, until the job comes, the money comes, and they sign on the line, they wouldn't bother. I'm taking a picture. It's just not, you know, for me, it's like, you know,
That's wonderful.
like to kind of snap it up. Sometimes I mess. This weekend I did ski pictures, and I have a long way to go skiing-wise, because I don't really even understand what's the perfect form. It's like when I first had to do jumping horse pictures, my timing wasn't you know, I had to practice, I had to learn. I had to take not a class, but, you know, what do you call it, trial and error, people giving me advice or stuff like that. So I stayed with it, you know. You got to stay. But I like my hobby.
You're great. I think we've done it.
You got some stuff? But if you then afterwards, if you want to, like, glance through this or this, just take a little tab. Maybe they should just give you one of those, like, stickums. And you could say, maybe we need that just to intersperse, because as good as I look, you know, you probably want to show a couple of visions or something.
Of you?
Not me, no, of my results, I would imagine.
Heavens.
So within it, you
yeah.
can kind of, what do you call that, when they fade in and fade
Fade
out,
out.
you know?
Right.
So you can say, oh, God, you know, here he is, and we can hear his voice, let's lower his voice, raise Grace's, you know, or stuff like that, right?
Like in the movies.
Yeah, like you can kind of work me a little bit.
I miss you.
Stuff
I
like
miss
that.
you a lot, I gotta tell you. I really
Well, you
do.
never know, you might come up with another kind of thing.
Another,
Right.
Listen, how I tried to get him to work on Mirabella. Oh, how I tried.
It was
how
because
I tried,
of people
I know.
like you and Liz Tilberis that I finally was able to country, and I thank you.
I kept hearing, this is what I
You
kept
know, there
hearing.
was that
listen,
moment.
I can't
you know,
afford it,
where
I mean,
photographers, you know, when the whole, let's call it the bizarre change. I forget, maybe that was 9 years ago, 8 years ago, I can't remember. When that happened, when the Elle magazine thing started to happen, when Grace started, Mirabella, all of that did make the photographers slightly more important, which was good. It may not have been all deserved or stuff like that. You know, a little bit of competition is a great thing. You know, it's a healthy thing, I think. Because I think if somebody wins the whole thing, they're going to get a little bored. We don't have any competition. We don't have to worry. The other guy has no money. Or he's not selling. You know, maybe they look at their figures and say, or, you know, I'm sure as an editor, or when you go to the newsstand and certain magazines are about that thick, you kind of say to yourself, we got to worry about this group for a little while, you know. You know, I always used to make jokes, say, give me a quarter pound of American Vogue on the September issue, right?
I'll take a quarter pound of American.
Or something like that, you know. You needed that. You needed that weight to know that people were interested.
Jessica Days, the editor, the Floridiana of Reland, the editor of Vogue, used to pick up the magazine and kind of hold it like this. Good. It's very good.
It weighs a lot.
What she meant was it weighed a lot. I mean,
It's a very important thing. You know, there was a period before the bazaar changed, let's say 2 times ago, when that magazine was on the way to thin.
Oh, yeah.
And so you, as a person who was, let's say, being asked to work, sometimes you kind of say, that's not a great sign. It's not like, maybe they have a limited budget. Or maybe the advertisers just don't know that they should be putting their stuff in there, you know. So I think you got to go, you know, it is a wonderful, but at the same time, it's still a mercenary business like anything else.
Finally.
You know, it's, you know, as much as you remember, I remember all the wonderful characters, you know, it's still the opportunities, you know, I think of it more as, I wouldn't have gotten to that place in England or that place in Rome unless somebody would have said, we want you, and then you kind of go, well, thanks now. And maybe on my way, something will occur and I'll get something, you know. And that's, you know, so I'm still at it. And having the kids, of course, makes me kind of even more enthusiastic because I have to pay for their school, you know, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I used to always
You get a little practical. I used to say to Grace, Grace would say this, I would say, Grace, believe it or not, I'm no longer by myself, and I'm no longer living as a hippie and a walker.
Right.
I need, you know, isn't that terrible?
I used to hear
We
this
do
all the
become mercenaries.